I know. Gentlemen, we're gonna start. So, this is the discussion meeting. We're sorry we're a couple minutes late. Discussion meeting for Tuesday, May 14th. Mr. McGill, you will begin us.
Thank you, Madam President. Tonight's regular agenda, we will have the consideration of a resolution amending Mount Lebanon's code for our civil service rules and regulations. We heard about that last time in discussion session. We'll have the consideration to execute a 3-year agreement extension for the assignment of a school resource officer for the Mount Lebanon School District. We'll have the consideration of a subdivision plan for the property on Beebling Road. That's a 4-lot subdivision. Also consideration of a subdivision plan for the property on McCormick Lane. That's simply a lot line revision. And then finally, a consideration for the adjustment to the financial security that was posted for Summit Point Land Development Plan. This is the release of the final security. That project is now essentially complete. And we've performed final inspections. Are ready to release the remaining financial securities.
Fabulous. All right, we'll let you begin with the professional services policy, Mr. McGill.
Thank you, Madam President. I can be very brief with this. At the last discussion session, you'll remember I ran through a draft of a professional services policy. This was something that was brought up during the budget workshops last year. And there were a couple of comments as part of that presentation. Commissioner Flint had mentioned having this not just be specific to the recurring, I'll say, professional services that were identified. So in the requirements, it now says for all professional service contracts and isn't specifically limited to those 3 or those 5 that were previously identified. It also determines that the RFP shall be issued when required by the commission. So this gives the commission the discretion to indicate when they would like to go out for those services. Based on a comment from Commissioner Silverman, we now added, or I amended language to say that those contracts shall not exceed a term of 7 years, but may be awarded for less than that based on commission input. Was previously identified it being 5.
Right.
And the only other change was in under the requirements, number 2, I simply added, it used to say a 1, 3, and 5 year, and now it says 1, 3, 5, and 7 year rate proposal. And we did talk about the requirement, the $100,000 amount that was mentioned in number 9. The solicitor and I discussed, we both felt it was fine to leave for now. It's not the only qualifying factor in there. We can revisit that dollar amount when and if we need to.
Sounds good.
So if the commission is satisfied with the policy, I will finalize and we will move that forward as commission policy for recurring professional services.
Questions, comments?
Looks good to me.
Everybody's okay? All right, perfect. Okay, Mr. Dennis Flynn, come on down.
Yeah, everybody, I'm gonna pull up a presentation to share.
Just as an overview, there's a lot going on in the consent order world, and with our SOARs, we're kind of reaching pivotal points within the order that we thought it'd be good to come to the commission. Just give you an update. It's not exciting stuff, but we're making good progress and moving along. So turn it over to Dennis.
Yeah, so I have been here in front of you a couple different times to talk different aspects of the consent order, as Dan mentioned. This is a little bit more of an update. We do have some key points that we're going to go over. Just very quick, the overall background on the consent order, we've talked about it before. The corrective active project, we do have a larger project that we talked about, got bid out last year, about a $3 million project. So that's one of our good first steps to meeting our corrective action requirements. GROW grants. So we had some that we've already received funding for, some that we're applying for. Regionalization, and that is with Alcosan, and that's passing over some of the larger trunk sewers that are multi-municipal to Alcosan. So some of those agreements have been coming in. And then lastly, we can touch base on some of the upcoming consent order requirements. So number of topics. Please stop me at any point if you have any questions. Try to go quickly through it to make sure that we keep you guys moving.
Is it possible if you used more initials?
Yeah.
EXP, POC,
There's a
GLS.
lot. Well, that's part of the test. I think.
Great, so you don't understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, the first couple times we tried to make sure that we spelled it all out. Now we're going right to the
We're
initials.
done, yeah. Initials
Uh,
on.
So consent order, or you can see COA or CO at times. This is the fourth version of it. We're in the phase 2 of the consent order. Ultimately, it all came down to the exhibit B. That's what you see on the right-hand side. A lot of colors there. There's 17 different POCs or point of connections within the municipality from Lebanon. Lebanon's at the top, flows in 17 different directions. From that, the GLS or Gold Line Standard, any place that you are over that threshold, and that's just in terms of how much I&I you have within your system, as measured by the initial metering, required corrective action to get you back down to that point, or a source flow reduction project. Those reports are due at the end of September. We have 7 points of connection that we are over that gold line threshold. And then we are also tributary to 2 SSOs or sanitary sewer overflows. That's any time that the sewage leaves the system. Those 2 SSOs are actually outside of Mount Lebanon, aren't within Mount Lebanon, but Mount Lebanon has flow that is tributary to each of those. We'll get into that a little bit too. Those reports are due at the end of June. So that's an upcoming deadline that we'll see sooner rather than later. And then lastly, annual reports are due at the end of June as well. This is a quick overall map. You can kind of see Mount Lebanon in there in the background, but this is blown up and even including kind of your multi-municipal, your neighbors. This is a depiction of those points of connection. And you see the red and the purple, those are the locations where it is above that gold line standard. And then the light blue are just other sheds that are under that gold line standard. Again, just trying to give you kind of the larger feel of the municipality. The corrective action projects, I think I was here in November to speak to you about that. We got that out to bid towards the end of the year. I believe that was awarded in January or February. In order to meet those corrective action requirements or get to that gold line standard, we had 4 point of connections that required manhole to manhole lining, which CIPP, sanitary sewer lining, cured in place pipe lining. That is a way of kind of putting a new pipe within the pipe. Lebanon has done a great job of trying to stay proactive and stay ahead of that and trying to line most of the municipality. This is targeting areas with higher I&I or inflow and infiltration and lining those areas. This was kind of the low hanging fruit that we talked about and trying to stay in front of that. It also included repairing some of the manholes. A lot of older brick manholes within the municipality. Older brick manholes are ripe for having additional flow making its way in between those mortar joints that have failed over time. So that is kind of a combined effort of trying to do that work. Again, that was a larger project, got that project kicked off with the contractor. You may even have seen State Pipe Services or in situ form throughout the municipality here recently. State Pipe is the subcontractor to in situ form. They're starting to do their pre-televising to evaluate all those lines that are to be lined. The next step, they'll line all those lines and perform the manhole rehabilitations. Brief little schedule there for you. Like we said, they did start that pre-CCTV. They currently anticipate that they'll start that manhole to manhole lining process sometime in the middle of June. They'll make sure that they're notifying residents, notifying both us and the municipality when they'll be in town. Just oftentimes when people are doing the lining, you'll get some comments of the styrene smell, so you may hear that from constituents or from folks, but try to take every precaution ahead of time and try to notify those residents that that could be affected by that work. This project does also include growth grant considerations, and then I know I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for this entire aspect of it, did include grow grants. Part of that grow grant requires that you perform metering during and after the project. So the expectation would be that meters would be placed in the ground prior to that, prior to the middle of June. Anticipation would be that those meters will be in the ground approximately 7 months, to be during and 3 months after work has been completed. That's estimated at about $14,000. So just wanted to kind of bring that up now, may have that on later.
That's in the contractor's bid.
The contractor will be responsible for any extension to that. That $14,000 would be paid. We didn't want necessarily the contractor handling the information or relying on them to supply the information. So the metering will be performed directly by a contractor through Mount Lebanon, but the contractor is responsible for any delays or any extension to those meters being in the ground.
They're
That was
not
our
completed
fear.
with their project.
Right, if they're not completed with their project within the time initially allocated. They're anticipated to be completed by September 16th. That is the final completion per the contract. And with that, again, the meters would stay in place for another 3 months after that. So to satisfy both what is required by the GROW grant, for you to get the grant reimbursement funds from that, but also for the requirements of the consent order that you're doing your post evaluation of this work that was completed. This is just kind of a brief, and I'll go through this quickly, but these were the areas and locations where where this work is being completed. The names aren't specific just to that road, but more of a generalized location of where we're at. Castle Shannon Boulevard, about 5,000 lineal feet of lining. You'll see the general location there. The yellow are the pipes proposed to be lined. Scott Road, Pennsylvania Boulevard. This again is a little over 6,500 lineal feet of sewer, anywhere from 8 to 15 inches. Again, focusing on the flow isolation work that was completed that identified the high areas of I&I. With this project, that it's intended that we would remove about 20 million gallons of I&I per year. See there kind of where it's a little centralized in that lining to be completed. And that's also the low-lying area where streams may be, and most likely where flow or where just additional inflow and infiltration exists. Cochrane Road, Larchmont Road. Again, a little over 6,000 lineal feet of lining, 26 manholes to be restored. That's a nice little image there too of the before and after of the CIP line. I didn't bring my my prop with me. I think you were at the LGA meeting where I had that. It is truly a line, a pipe within a pipe. It starts as a felt tube, ends up becoming hardened like a pipe within the pipe. So that's the other benefit here. Not only are we trying to remove I&I, but essentially it's repairing these sewers that were installed 70, 100 years ago that are now in kind of disrepair or eventually are past. They are currently past their lifespan. So it's kind of a twofold approach here in terms of getting the I&I removal and to replace infrastructure. And lastly, as part of this project was Little Sawmill Run. This was actually an image there on the side too of of a cured in place pipe. That's closer to 9,500 lineal feet of sewer to be lined with 50 manholes to be rebuilt.
Yeah, can I ask you a question?
Yes,
Do we anticipate that the lining for these projects will get us to that gold line standard, or is that a requirement? Do we just have to reduce by a certain percentage?
all great questions. Initially, there was the thought that it was only a 10% reduction. There was feedback that was provided that you do have to at least get to that threshold. In this case, the anticipation is that we would get to that threshold in these four points of connection. However, there is not like a grading of if you did or didn't get there. We're using our best sound engineering judgment, doing both lining and the manhole rehabilitation, kind of like a belts and suspender approach, trying to give us the best chance of getting there. But if for some reason you don't get there, we're only focused on the public side, not the private side here. So that's always something to keep in mind. We have blinders up to about 50% of the system.
Right.
And that's just how the order is stated. That you would not necessarily get penalized for that. However, the next order is expected to just reduce that threshold and most likely would just require that you have additional work that would need to be completed under that next order.
Is that expected that the next order would reduce it?
That reduce your expected threshold, yes, that is kind of the expectation discussion so far. So that threshold that was discussed, essentially that gold line standard that was created, it's a formula based on how many inch miles, how much sewer you have within your system. But that was developed where essentially of those 2008, when they metered the entire county, there was 50% were above that threshold, 50% were below that threshold. So it was kind of the middle point. And it's right around 4,000 gallons per inch mile day. You'll hear that. That's how you measure the I&I. But there's a lot of places, other places that are about 10 years ahead of us in these same type of orders that are down to like 2,000 gallons per inch mile day. So this was kind of like the trade-off of we didn't want to start down at that bottom and there'd be a lot of people that would just not be able to even come close. So this was kind of that middle threshold with the expectation. It'll be 2027 is after this order is set to be complete. And they actually have written into the order that Alcosan and the municipalities would work together and work with the regulatory agencies to develop that next order. And it's expected it would come down.
By the time that next order happens, 2027 or however long it takes for agencies to work together, like, we're at the point where we've done a lot of the public work. Like,
Right.
we really have to get onto the conversation about the private work at that point.
Well, sure, that's one part of it. So you can, I look at all these federal regulations as they start you in pieces and incrementally ramp you up. We've seen it with the MPDS permits, and we're seeing it now with the consent order. So we're doing the best we can do within the confines of what we can, where we can work in the public system. So then if you go back and even if you do the private work up to the house, require it to be, over time, all the laterals to be replaced to the house, what else is left? At that point in time, you're talking equalization tanks, you're talking other larger structures somewhere in the watershed, most likely not in Mount Lebanon. Probably joint projects would have to happen near the interceptor source, because at that point in time, you've done everything that you can do. So they don't want to wham everybody in
Is that
the.
a possibility? Is that like a potential reality that we could see?
I think part of the reality is that Alcosan's taking over all the interceptor sewers, right? That's where we're handing over the assets now. We're any multiple municipal sewers we're taking over. So they're gonna control the keys. They'll control all the sewers all the way to their interceptor lines. So at some point in time, whether we do it or whether Alcosan does it through their rate system, they're gonna build big projects along the creeks and the rivers to further lessen the flows. And that's what we've seen in other cities, Detroit, Chicago, Boston. I mean, they're all Columbus. Yeah, I mean, you name it, they've kind of hit everybody. I think Pittsburgh's been such a unique animal for them, Allegheny County, given our number of municipalities and everything else, it's been such a complex issue to get everybody, even to the point where we are now, it's like, it's amazing we've gotten here. You know, and people are starting to cooperate more. So I think it'll eventually get to the point, and where I see going in the future is they'll handle all the trunk lines. Anything more that we can't do, I'm not gonna make people go rip our basements up, right? That would be suicide. So once we get every ounce of water we can get out, then they're gonna, oh, let's take it down another notch. And let's build some big facilities along the creeks and the rivers. Right? I mean.
Yeah, and that'll be very often for those sanitary sewer overflows specifically. And that, we'll talk about the overflow elimination plans that were submitted, but that was included within this order, but nobody's able to jump out and kind of put a $20 million tank in right now. So for the
Buried?
typically, yes,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, my,
Yeah,
just
so that-
envisioning the rivers with
But-
these big tanks.
But right, I mean, think about it, when Alcoasyn was created, the guy that developed the system was a guy named Laboon, he was the engineer. And at that point in time, all we had was raw sewage dumping in creeks, right?
Yeah,
So they connected all these little systems up, created the Alcoasyn system, created the interceptors, but there was so much water, there was an overflow at every connection point.
sure.
So those connection points still have overflows, and the ultimate goal is to reduce or eliminate those overflows. So now we're giving plans to eliminate overflows in the upper reaches of the system, with eventually the goal to eliminate them in the lower reaches of the system.
Yeah, and I think Alcoasyn presented at the one LGA meeting too, and they are doing some very huge projects that are billions of dollars worth of cost in order to put larger trunk pipes in, essentially like a 18-foot diameter kind of pipes that are deep tunnel systems, essentially to act as storage of a lot of this. So they are already implementing some of that down on the back end. But then ultimately the feasibility study that this order started in 2004, the feasibility study was reported back in 2013. And everybody said, well, I'm just gonna upsize my sewer, send all the flow to Alcoasyn. Alcoasyn said, we don't have capacity, we can't
Right,
treat that
right,
much flow. So that's where the tanks and some of the larger storage facilities come into play. That's also why they've put these thresholds in terms of how much flow you can send to a certain point. So, and kind of back to your question, there may be, and I would expect just for anybody to kind of actually implement anything on the private side, and it's gonna have to be a regional approach or a requirement that is imposed,
Yeah.
as opposed to individual municipalities kind of going in and forcing some, like Dan said, forcing somebody to rip up their basement. They did have within this order, the lateral ordinance program as an option, and that was only if you didn't have to do any other work. That was they wanted to make sure everybody did something. That was a way to do something, but there could be a potential that they do require that within the next order, or there could be something different. In Columbus, I know they have it where they went out and televised all laterals. That was a requirement that was imposed. And so a lot of the laterals have now been lined.
Who did that work? Was that the municipality or the resident?
I think it might have been similar to like the GROW grants where the region had money that they were able to kind of give to the municipalities. I don't think that it was borne by the resident themselves in terms of investigating.
Right.
But again, that's down the road. It's just something to keep in mind that we're not affecting that. This order may tell us when we do this post metering, maybe we had a lot more flow coming from the private side than the public.
From the
side.
laterals, yeah.
I had heard about, the large tanks that was to be built on the north side. You're saying in addition to that, there'll also be tanks along the way, or is it one instead of the other?
Who knows?
No,
No. I mean, what'll happen is there's only, like, they want us to keep getting the amount of flow down that we're putting into the system.
Sure.
We're gonna do that incrementally. We're gonna do as much as we can, line everything.
Mhm.
Let's say we get a lateral program, all the laterals get done. Where do you go from there? And you're still over.
You have to. put
I
them
just
in.
imagine if you put the tanks along the way, or just say, just do it at the end of the line, part of the fun.
Well, the problem is when you have a, still it's a matter, they're gonna upsize the trunk line along like Schurter's Creek, right?
Yeah.
They're adding another whole pipe along Chartiers Creek, whole way out.
And
So that'll
that-
provide additional capacity, but it, as I tell people, no matter how big we make the pipe, God can always make a bigger story.
For sure, and that's part of it that we've seen,
There we go.
trying to separate as much as possible, and it is gonna be an incremental process of getting there. And so they're doing what they can as part of their wet weather plan, you may have heard that before, and part of that wet weather plan does include these larger pieces, but that is also the expectation that all the individual municipalities contributing to that flow are doing their part, part of these orders too. So there may be more that they're gaining more to their system as they're working their way up. So there may be other tanks or systems along the way, but for now, this is the starting point.
And I mean, as Dennis shows in this next slide, with how aggressive the municipality's been able to be in terms of funding projects, you can see that all the work is paid off in $1.5 million that's benefited the system that our ratepayers really haven't had to pay.
Yeah, that's all from the GROW funding, $1.5 million worth of funding through that GROW program. That is funded by Alcoasand, so it is something where the rates collectively go into paying it, but
Right.
obviously if it's there,
Spread
we
out.
want to make sure that kind of we're there to request it. Now, those are all ones that have already been awarded. See, a number of them are either completed, currently under construction, or awaiting kind of final report for completion there.
So Dennis, I have one question. My experience through all this over the last however many years has been that both Alcoasand, the state, DEP, like everyone's been pretty willing to work together. And it doesn't seem like anyone's gotten like a, crazy hard slap on the hand, at least from where I sit. You may see it differently because I know you work with other municipalities that are not as well situated as we are. But the comment about Keith's question about hitting the gold line standard in those 4 projects, we do the engineering calculations, say, we're gonna hit it, right? And we're kind of, it's like, we're kind of left at that, right? We've got some flow monitoring in place, but we're not going back. And so like, Phil, do we feel comfortable with that? Like, we're good, right? Like, they're not gonna come back and say like, hey, the gold line standard is 4,000 and you're at like 4079, you gotta do another $1 million project. Like, we all here, meaning you and Phil, based on what you've seen from the consent order, because I know we had some early, language that we were like, it's a little iffy, but then it got better. We feel good about that.
Yeah, again, the way. It's not the way the orders are written, but the way they're sort of being, you have to do something, I'll say in good faith, to really try to reduce the flows. As we've progressed through the process, the good faith is now real good faith that you really think it's going to reduce the flows in the
Which is backed up by calcs.
calculations, and then, their engineers will look at what Gateway designs
Yeah.
and say, yeah, that's good.
They're not crazy, right?
Yeah, and collectively as a region, all the engineers are using the same tools
Right.
that were developed through the wet weather program. So we know how much expected flow is supposed to reduce by lining. As Dennis said, manholes are being done. And then in addition, on the big project we're doing now, we're actually putting mechanical seals at the end of the lines, which is something we've never done before, to really, try to lock it down and see exactly how much can we get out max.
So in the absence of a black and white, we're doing about as much as we can on the good faith side of stuff.
Yeah, and again, like you said, the calculations are now pretty solid. Well, they're.
And they have a limit for what we can, just based on engineering standards, and WEF Tech is who developed these. I don't know what WEF Tech actually stands for, but I know that was who developed these standards of 30 to 60% reduction is what you would expect from lining work. We're going above and beyond by putting mechanical end seals, by doing the manhole rehabilitation, knowing that those are all gonna kind of continue to get us closer to that. So we may be using that kind of 60% anticipated reduction, but knowing that it might fall in that 30 to 60%. So I try to make sure that we're all on the understanding that, there's a wide range there of where this could come in, and trying to kind of balance how much monies are spent. It's finding that needle in the haystack. balancing that with making sure that we're doing as much as we can to eliminate as much flow.
And these are really test, right, this is the first phase of this is almost like a test run.
Yeah.
To see what you do.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I can't see, I've not seen anybody that's, other than maybe MTSA, that's as aggressive as Mount Lebanon's been on taking care of stuff. And even MTSA only has one piece that goes to Alcoasand, so.
And we stay pretty close with Three Rivers Well Weather, that's kind of
Sure.
the regional
Yeah.
entity, and Alcoasand throughout this process to make sure that we're bouncing things off of them.
And they look to Mount Lebanon as a gold line standard, really, when I'm saying that, because there's so many communities I see that are just limping along. They're just trying to do the bare minimum to comply. It's not, we're fortunate to have the amount of density we have here with the size of the system. I always tell people that, it's still not overburdensome to our residents. I think we're still using the same surcharge on Alcoasand rates that we worked with Marcia Taylor on probably
Mhm.
15 years ago. We have not raised the rate. So.
The other thing too, Craig, some of the calculations on a regional basis are also based on the total cost of the region. I mean, that was a consideration when they
Right.
said what they want done. I mean, one way to think of it is what kind of storm in 2, 5, 10 are you designing for? They're not asking for 100-year storm.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I mean, it seems like everyone's been working together, rather than, even though this is a order, it seems like it's been.
I think
That's not the way it
understand.
started though.
Yeah.
It started with,
No.
with letters that came from the EPA that said, you'll put flow monitors in the ground. Remember the 308 letters? That started it all. And then, it's come full circle. It really has.
They understand the burden on the municipalities, and that is that good faith effort, as long as everyone's kind of doing their part. Mount Lebanon has a huge part to play in having the 17 different point of connections and denser systems.
Yeah,
we have.
only the city has more.
Right.
The regionalization is something that's interesting because that's sort of novel to this area.
Right,
That did not start that way, that you need to regionalize.
Right.
That came about, as I think I indicated, there's so many municipalities, there's so many municipal lines. That when you had to submit data for that, I think the regulators found out that people were already arguing about the cost. And those arguments were gonna end up in lawsuits.
Right.
So that was a solution of get these multi-municipal lines into Alcoasand's hands. So that there's, lawsuits over $1 million, $2 million, $3 million fix didn't take place because again, that's, we one line, I think, with 5 municipalities. If we can't agree on something and go to court, that's years.
Yeah.
And the money at stake is enough where it's worthwhile to go to court.
I know we're running short on time. We can wrap this up pretty quickly. What do we have?
You can cut me off at any point, or I'll just try to give the clip notes of
Okay.
the rest of it.
notes, go ahead.
So for Cycle 9 Grow grants, just because that was recently submitted for letters of intent, there were 3 projects that were submitted. Beg Snyder Park, we talked about that before. You actually have received a small water and sewer grant for that. That permitting and everything is underway for that currently. That's anticipated to go out to bid later this year. That one is expected to be submitted for full application in June after review with Alcoasand. So there would be a resolution most likely at one of your meetings in June for that one. The other 2 that we submitted, the Painters Run and Hope Hollow, those were both reimbursements, work that was already completed.
Mhm.
The only thing that was not completed was the post metering for that. So Alcoasand kind of came back, talked to us, said you'd have a much better chance of getting a higher percent reimbursement for this if you do your post metering first and resubmit under cycle 10 next year. So that was the feedback that we had just recently from them on those 2. So we would anticipate putting meters in the ground for those 2 and reapplying next year. And these are just some the actual photo at Shadow Lawn. And showing some of the lining work that has been completed. Regionalization, again, I'll touch on this quickly. This was all sewers that were 10-inch and greater and multi-municipal.
Yeah, anything in red
Mhm.
on that map is what's proposed to turn over to Alcoasand. They serve more than one community.
Right, yeah, more than one, yeah, and that's why you see it on the outskirts for the most part, all larger diameter pipe. Actually, that Beck Snyder Park project is part of that northeast kind of red section there. But that's one that at the end of the day, if you get both the GROW grant and the small water and sewer grant, essentially it would be completed at no cost to the municipality. So even though it's to be turned over to Alcoasand, that work would be benefiting the municipality in terms of hitting your corrective action goals. And knowing that you still flow through those pipes, you want those to be.
The only questions that and the regionalization makes sense. The only questions that I had were, so one was legal. I'm not a lawyer, but I looked at that first contract they sent over, and Phil, we talked about it. It was almost like it wasn't, not to say it wasn't a serious contract, but there was just a lot in there that didn't make sense. And then there were questions like, have there been conversations about, timing of fixes, right? Because if something happens now, we own these lines, we're pretty quick to fix or repair. What happens when something happens and Alcoasand takes over? Do we have a sense of what response time is gonna be and, what that looks like? And, so those are some of the questions that I had, because we're gonna hear from residents if something happens like we do now. And then we're all pretty responsive here and we have the resources to get stuff done pretty quickly. I can't imagine that gets better. So the question is, how much worse is it gonna get? What does that look like?
That's a good question. I think they're staffing up for that to be able to handle it. Fortunately, most of the lines they work on are trunk lines.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be direct. We don't have a lot of direct resident connections to them. And then the fact is that if there's a trunk line overflowing, it's usually it's an environmental issue where they have to respond immediately because it's flowing into the creek directly. So I would assume they'll have a response team.
And that is a question that they have heard a lot. So
Yeah.
that was kind of their response, is that not only that, this is what they do every day. They manage sewers, so they do have crews that are out constantly. But that is a concern, and Mount Lebanon is one that kind of is extremely proactive and jumps on right away. And at the same time would make sure that they're kind of alerting Alcoasand if it was one of their sewers. The one item I'd like to point out on this, so we have received a couple of updated agreements. So we'll review, make sure that engineering within that all makes sense. And then we'll get it over to Phil to review as well, before we get it back to Keith for the final signature.
Yeah, we've developed a little process for checking the agreements, checking the assets that we're giving over, sort of the check between the engineer's office and the solicitor's office before we tell Keith, go ahead, sign it. Yeah.
One of the steps associated with this, there are a number of defects within these lines. Most of them are very difficult. We've got lines within McNeely, a lot of areas that would be difficult to repair. So there was defects that were identified. When we first looked at it, we said that's going to be a very expensive repair. Alcoasand has set it up with the PCRARA, PACRA, but that is a post-closing repair and reimbursement agreement. Essentially, we provided the projects that Mount Lebanon has, the contracts, and said, this is how much bare bones it would take to replace that pipe, as opposed to having all the restoration, all the traffic control, all that's all taken out. So Mount Lebanon would only owe $120,000 towards
I see.
I think there's about 15
Got
different repairs that are in that kind of stage, where it made more sense to go with a post-closing repair agreement rather than completing it yourself, because it would be too costly or just difficult with the nuances. We have some that are in isolated areas that would be very difficult to get to.
So they're, and just really quickly, in essence, they're accepting our unit prices from our contracts right now that we have in place. And we give them an estimate based upon those unit prices. Don't include, when you open up the ground, you're always open extras, right? So you give them that bare bones and they're gonna take and repair it. We have to pay them that amount for post-closing, but we get out of that.
Yeah.
No, they just do it. If we just give them it and it's on their backs to do the
Yeah,
repair, to do the rest, right? Yeah.
They're not coming back to the municipality. And even that, they've also done it that way, just for more, again, that good faith effort of you're giving them something they don't want to take, kind of broken goods. So it's kind of like the
Yeah, I mean, that's
closing
kind of like one of the
agreement
things I'm worried about, like if, we're paying $100 a foot and it's $200 a foot, is that a project that, sits not done? Or they start working it, because it's so much more than they expected. it doesn't get done for months and months and months.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that we've looked at are not anything that they're.
We're not worried about imminent collapse. Those were required to be taken care of right away. These are just, okay, there's a break in the line underneath McNeely that's, breaking the side of the pipe should be repaired. But in order to physically perform that, it would take triple or quadruple what we had initially estimated. So ultimately, their other point was they may not go in and specifically do that repair. They may decide to upsize that entire line. So, there's other facets to it.
Okay.
Lastly, just for future, the next steps associated with it, submission of the SSO elimination plan reports. Let's do determination of source flow reduction projects and by the September deadline. So you'll see a couple different reports that we'll be putting together for those. And then those projects are all required to be completed by the end of 2025. We've already got a head start on a number of them. There will just be some more that will be coming along the way. And then finally, the post evaluation in 2026 and the next order in 2027. Yep.
Great.
Hi.
Good job.
We can talk about sewers all night.
I know.
Just can't help it.
Zero.
Yeah.
I like that. A lot of money.
Oh, it's.
Despite the
Yeah.
grants, it's
Yeah.
$3 million project, that's,
I know.
you know.
A lot of sidewalk. Right,
Now programming.
okay.
Steve, the sewer presentation or Paul, the sewer?
So we are here once again to talk about the main park site plan. I have John and Alex from Patrick MTR, the prime consultants on the project. So the last time we were here, we talked specifically about some items for the rec center. But we want to get back in front of the commission to kind of go through the current status of the main park site plan. We're honing in on some recommendations. I think they're going to do a little bit of public outreach towards the end of the month. Just to get a little bit of feedback. And the one thing I want to stress as we're going through this, because I know we're a little short on time and they have a lot to talk about, but the overall goal of this project is to create the 30-year vision for the park. We fully recognize that not all the improvements are going to be installed all at once. The goal of this project from the beginning was to give the municipality a vision to work towards that as we make improvements to certain sections of the park, whether it's improvements to the playground area, improvements to the tennis areas, what's our guiding goal that we're working towards? So, you may see some things that you think that's not going to happen in the next 10 years, but maybe in 20 or 30 years when that asset needs to be replaced, this is our vision for what we want to have happen in the park overall. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to John and Alex to talk through where we are with things.
Great, thanks, Ian. This is
Oh, man.
It's the second time we met with the commission. The first time we talked about the overall park.
Right.
We had recommendations. We were just putting things out there to get a reaction from the commission.
Right.
And so we refined that now to address some of the comments, some of the concerns that were brought up from the commission. In addition, incorporating the rec center recommendations that we developed with Draw Collective. So today we're going to talk about 5 areas of the park. The racket sports area, the athletic fields area, forest, the recreation center, and the play space. So with that, next slide, please. Alex will describe the proposed improvements for each of these areas.
So note, the first 3 areas, the racket area, the athletic fields, and the forest, there is one concept that we are proposing for each. For the recreation center and the play space, you saw the recreation center last time. There's 3 concepts for each of those. The reason being that the racket area, the athletic field, and the forest area, we are going through accessibility, usability, needs and desires, and there seems to be only a little bits of improvements for each of those areas in order to achieve the goals that they're desiring. So there wasn't a need for multiple concepts for those. So we'll go through the first 3. The first being the racket sports area. So the primary change for this area is actually in the entrance drive and in the corner. This park is in need of a grander entrance, so to locate this park, because it seems kind of hidden in the drive, so it's expanding the circle, creating a sign area, some planting, and in addition to this, expanding the circle will also help with when you drive in, it will redirect your vision so people won't drive up the sidewalk to go into the parking lot. They'll actually follow the road is the hope.
So at the Greenbrier intersection, that's really meant to be like a
Right.
boulevard entrance and a gateway entrance
Right.
that says you are here at Mount Lebanon Park.
And also to have a subsequent smaller signage at the corner of Holly Crested Cedar to also like have a park sign to be, this is where you are, this is here. And just to emphasize that. And with that, that area of field on Holly Crest and Cedar is a underutilized space, is used a little bit by the church, and we heard that some pickup sports happen there sometimes, but it could use a pavilion from what we heard, so we added a small pavilion and a pathway and a shortcut connection that goes through that to the rest of the court areas.
We also heard that that was used for overflow parking for large events, so
Yes.
we didn't want to put a shelter, gazebo, or something more prominently in that open space. We wanted to leave it
Sure.
open and available for overflow parking.
Yes, so we also added some small amenities that are needed, like bike racks and possibly a new accessible bathroom building.
Mhm.
And with that, another thing that we heard a lot that people wanted is pickleball courts and some more paddle courts. So this plan breaks up into 2 phases on how to convert some of the existing tennis courts into pickleball courts. So number 6 is the first phase of converting that tennis court into pickleball courts.
I believe that's existing courts 8 and 9. And so the thought there was that that could also be domed if there's a need and if there's a desire moving forward for indoor pickleball through the cold season.
Number 9, the paddle courts. In discussions with the paddle court people, I think they would like to see the tennis court below where you have the paddle courts,
We have.
As
heard that,
paddle court?
yes.
because they can then
Yes.
see
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they can look at it from their new building.
I was gonna say ties into our.
Yeah, they can observe, from there.
One of the things we wanted to be cognizant of as we were trying to put this together was, in the big picture, long-term, how many tennis courts are we proposing to remove? And if we're, proposing to remove, 5 tennis courts to install pickleball, we wanted to show at least a preliminary option of you could install paddle courts without removing another
Yeah,
tennis court.
sure.
So trying to strike that balance as well. But yes, we did hear that same
Yeah,
sentiment.
maybe you could switch it, or, I don't know, I can't. It's hard looking at a flat drawing as opposed to standing there and looking at that space.
The so the existing sand volleyball court
Yeah,
we're proposing that sand volleyball court be replaced with a small parking area because with the pickleball courts and the addition of paddle courts on that upper level.
Right.
There's not any accessible parking to serve
Exactly.
that area currently. So those spaces there at number 11 would provide accessibility to the upper court area. in the
And
park.
also the basketball court, because it
Yes.
currently doesn't have it now.
good.
So that is the court areas. The next section is the athletic fields. So this area, is to help with accessibility again and usability, and that's primarily reconfiguring the parking lot to have it be a little bit safer. So that's adding sidewalks, curved sidewalks along the edges and a midway crossing. So both fields could be utilized by the concession stand and people can walk across the parking lot safely. With that, we restriped it, pushed the dumpsters into the hillside and moved the storage to the other side of the fields, where number 13 and number 14 are. And that will help open up that parking space area and actually give more parking than it's currently there, even with the removal of some spaces with the midway crossing.
Along 12, you've got on the field side, where it's 3 and then 12 on the field side. Where you have the curb now, is that the existing fence line of the field?
It is not, it's where the asphalt is, it's just on top of the asphalt, there's like a space.
Okay,
So the fence will stay as is. So the new fence is indicated there is a new combination fence because we've been told that a lot of home runs or foul balls from each side where it says 12 happen there. So they want a double height fence to prevent balls from hitting cars.
but essentially the fence is gonna be up against the edge of the sidewalk, right?
Correct.
Okay, so, I mean, I don't know if we have rules against like that entire area, 312, people just put chairs.
Well, we're also hoping
Putting
to
in
add
bleachers.
more
Yeah.
bleachers too.
Two.
Number 2 is more bleacher areas. There's bleachers on the other side of that field. Right
No,
here,
I get what you're
and
saying.
there's
They're about
bleachers
to
right
On-
here.
Move cursor down, this way, this way, this way, this way.
Come down
Field,
to
that
Seymour
field.
Field, middle and Seymour.
Yeah.
Thank
Oh.
Right now,
So this,
right there. Complaints about people put their chairs right there on the sidewalk. along
well,
there.
on the sidewalk, but also over there, so like where it says 3 and 12, right? So that area there are stands there,
Yes.
they just don't use them.
No,
And
the
people,
plan is to
people just sit.
relocate them to where number 9 is and increase the fence line and add 3 more bleachers. Move that and add 2 more bleachers right here. So hopefully that will eliminate the problem of people being up here. We're also hoping to put a tarp on the fence to,
Oh,
They
so
can't
it's people
see.
outside.
They can't
Yeah, good-
see.
good to go, yeah.
so you are forced to go
Yeah,
down
You
into the
have to go
bleacher
to the
areas.
bleachers, got it.
I guess what I'm saying is, which I don't think you're picking up is, there are stands where 3 and 12 are,
Mhm.
nobody uses them.
Right.
They literally put their chairs where the 3 and the 12 are, all up along that line, because they want to be on the side of the field where their kids are. So they're not gonna sit on 9 and 11.
During the ball games.
You could,
The
you
baseball
could-
and softball games.
you could
Yes.
build 100 stands there, they're not gonna sit there.
Well,
I'm just worried if we do that, then we're gonna have people sitting on.
You're saying 3 and 12 and 9 and 11, they're not near each other.
well, I mean, if
No,
you
you're
look
right.
between number 12 and number 15 along Cedar Boulevard.
Oh, okay. I'm just looking at this 3 and 12.
People set up here, all along that fence line.
Yeah,
You're watching,
We do
let's
down
say,
there.
Mount Lebanon baseball.
Yeah, although not as much recently as people have been complaining about that field. I'm just worried if we just put that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was saying about, between 3 and 12, they're in the left field for, the baseball field, the big baseball field.
Yeah.
And that's where I see a lot of people put their chairs because they're watching
Mm-hmm.
baseball in that field. To put some bleachers down here by middle field, if your kids are playing there, yeah, but if your kids are in the other half of the field, either playing
Too.
right here, but I'm talking about
Mhm.
where I see is right in
No, I
this
see
area
right
here.
So I understand completely what you're saying.
Yeah.
Field. and
The option
that
is-
stands there,
I mean, the option is to eliminate 8 parking spaces and put bleachers where number 3 is. There's only so much space.
Right.
But I think again, what you're missing is that, to me at least, I don't see necessarily the people where number 3 is, and I think they would probably be able to utilize the bleachers at 9-11. I'm talking about at the other end of your drawing.
There are bleachers right here and right here, if that helps, right here and here
So
on
we have them
either
on
side.
both the
Both
west field
sides,
block.
here and there.
Those are generally.
So they're above the dugouts, but it's
Yeah.
way out. in the
First
outfield.
base and third base
Yes.
line.
Seems like I covered that.
But getting back to Commissioner's point about the 3 and 12 for the middle field. Again, it's, what do you want? What's more important there? Is it more important to provide spectator seating for X number of people? I mean, we're providing a sidewalk and they can put their chairs on the sidewalk during game
No,
time.
that needs to be accessible
That's-
for people walking.
that's what I'm
not
saying.
sitting.
If a sidewalk goes there, because right now people are in that, there's a little bit of they pull their car in, they open up their trunk and they sit in their car, or they put their chairs right outside of the car and sit on the grass. There's a little bit of a dirt and grass kind of gully there. People don't walk there because people sit there. They walk on the inside where all the soccer nets are, because there's
Oh, I see.
there's a big amount of space between the foul line of the field and the fence line, so that's where people walk.
So, I mean, would the preference be to reduce parking there to place bleachers?
There is
Behind the
also a
sidewalk.
possibility to move the fence line in, but that would be way bigger.
The problem is that the expense associated with the field, if you're moving the fence line in, that curb is integral to the turf field system as well.
Very
I
expensive.
wouldn't start changing
And
fences on the field. I also wouldn't take parking away. As a parent of 3 girls who
Yeah,
played softball and I was at that field, the amount of parking between the overlap of parents
Between
coming in with
games.
kids, or
Right.
kids still on the field and other, I don't think we should be taking parking from there. We would potentially have an opportunity, we're gonna replace that turf field within the next couple of years. At that point in time, we could look at some additional locations for seating bleachers, I think.
I'm just saying, don't sidewalk it, because if, people are gonna sit there no matter what. And I agree with it. If you sidewalk it, the idea would be that it's for walking, and I just don't see that being an important spot for people to walk, especially if we have that cut across. A cut across with the crosswalks is a very good idea, because people do cut across that way, and it's,
I like to
Especially
cut
if you
across,
raise
I
it.
think to your point, Craig, you put the sidewalk in, you also have the issue of the bumper overhang from the vehicles.
Yeah.
That are gonna cut down on that walking area
Yeah.
anyway, and then if you put a chair there, it's just, so.
we'd be better off, because that's not turf there. There's, the turf ends, the fence, there's a section of grass. Then there's like it's not really a curb there, it's like there's some, then there's asphalt. Like that space there, maybe there's something we could do, I don't know how well.
So are you saying with the midway block, they would walk across and then a gate would be added into the fence? So then they would go inside the fence and walk along where the soccer fields are to get down to?
There's a cut by number 7 where the porta potties and there's a cut in the fence there. And there's a cut in the fence by the backstops.
So we would need at least a little bit of sidewalk to get from the midway crossing down to some sort of area to get into the fields, or at least to get them to the spectator area, which we're preferring is this area. So we want some sort of accessibility to go from the concession stands to those bleachers. So ideally, there is some sort of walkway there. It doesn't necessarily have to be a raised curb sidewalk, it can just be asphalt. But I personally think that it should at least be accessible from the concession stands to the bleachers.
And the issue that's there now is that that entire area is asphalt from one side to the other side, including the concession plaza. And so it
Well,
feels,
that's raised on the curb.
but it's a parking lot per
Yeah.
se for
Right,
vehicles, and there's
right.
no delineation of
Yeah,
accommodating
sure.
pedestrians in any form or fashion. So, our goal was to provide, whether it's curb and sidewalk or flush concrete, even with difference of material, you can put curb stops in the parking lot so that the overhang, they're not gonna go beyond an overhang on the sidewalk. And that at least would identify a path there. Now, policing, patrolling, people sitting there in chairs, that's going to happen. And that's gonna be impossible to not have that happen. So again, there's only so much space there, so it becomes, what do you do? We need to address ADA, we need to provide safe,
Yes.
comfortable, convenient routes for pedestrians between the fields, between the concession stands to the gates and the spectator areas. And so question is, so how do we best accommodate that in the limited amount of space that we have? And we're completely open in terms of, looking at options, but I want to be cognizant that, we're addressing, if somebody's sitting in their chair and somebody needs that from an accessibility standpoint, wheelchair comes up. I've seen it at the ball fields that I go to. People pick up their chairs, wheelchair passes by.
Move.
They go to, yeah, exactly. So, there are ways to work it out, but, again, I want the commission to be comfortable with whatever the final solution is that we are proposing. So, we'll talk about it internally some more to see if there's any other potential solutions that would help address that further, but, we're also trying not to impact the turf field and
Sure.
getting to the expense of doing major changes to that area.
I have a question. We get a lot of pressure because there aren't enough fields essentially for what people want to do. And we've been asked to light this field.
Clint Seymour Field, the large field,
Yeah.
yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about lighting technology? Has it improved enough that you can really
It's-
shoot it down and not have it overflow into neighborhoods?
Yes, we can provide you with some images of the LED systems that are the dark sky,
Right,
cutoff shields on,
sure.
and that light will not go past the fence lines.
Yeah,
But,
like
you know,
the
light
stairs,
field.
yeah.
So, I don't have the photos with me now, but we
That's
can
okay.
email them to
Yeah.
you. I mean, it's dramatic.
Yeah.
The photo shows and the light, the field is
Right.
bright and everything outside the field is dark.
Dark.
There's another municipality in the area that just did field lighting upgrades. I don't know if it's CV. I was just talking to someone about it. I'll get it.
I mean, it's come so
Yeah.
far that I was just thinking, when you first think about it, you're like, oh my gosh, but
It was their consideration too, not to, with the neighbors.
Yeah.
And that's,
Mhm.
I
The
work
neighbors,
over there,
sure.
I know that's their big,
Oh,
complaint is
sure.
gonna be the lights, so I'd love to see the pictures.
that's a
to see,
legitimate concern.
Whether it's in the backyard.
Thanks, John.
Real quick, just to make sure sorry, you have to understand, like, we were talking about bleachers and you have one by Middlefield, you have one on the hillside. By Seymour Field, was there a third bleacher that I missed, on the drawing here that's over by the storage shed?
Right here, it's existing.
The existing bleachers aren't labeled on there, but
That's right.
those,
Okay, just
they're
to make sure.
generally the long rectangle gray boxes.
Just to make sure, I didn't know too big anything here, so.
So are 13 and 14 the storage sheds that get moved from where they are now in the parking lot? Is that the idea?
13 is a
Okay.
relocated one, 14 is a new
Got
one,
it.
because we heard there is a need for more storage.
I'm curious why you didn't think about any changes to that hillside,
Which hillside?
the one above the field?
Between the field and the pool.
Yeah, just what's the thought there? Cause I mean, right now it's a lot of invasives.
Mhm.
It seems like space that could do something.
Yeah, our thought was that the invasives be removed and that be established as a meadow, the light, that yellow
Mhm,
rendering on there, those are areas of the park that we're proposing be converted to meadow areas.
mhm.
So once the invasives and the scrubby material, the woody material is removed, then that is planted with a meadow mix. And so that would incorporate wildflowers and whatnot. That would then, be required to be mowed, 3 times a year during the growing season. And the purpose of that is to keep the woody material from coming back
Coming
up
back,
through
sure.
it and to maintain the meadow. Now, it generally takes 2 to 3 years for a meadow to establish.
Mhm.
It's a fair amount of work to get it until you get it established, but once it's established, then it's just doing those, mowings throughout the growing season.
What do you think about that, Mr. Denellen?
We like the meadow idea.
Okay.
That was also incorporated into the tennis center. We have some extremely steep slopes and we think
Yeah.
it would be, visually attractive and attractive to our mowing contractors if they didn't have to try to hang on to those steep slopes and mow weekly.
Okay, good, thank you.
So back to the racket sports area,
Yeah.
the yellow areas there are areas for
Yeah.
these meadows.
So there was no real thought to bleachering or doing other things on that hillside? I mean, again, I appreciate, I'm a believer in the meadows. But just curious, right, again, it seems like there were potential opportunities to integrate with the pool, to think about other ways to integrate into the other parts of the park. Right, to create more connectivity between the spaces, or with other spaces outside of these fields.
Yeah, it's a very steep slope and it's very difficult to get accessibility up that slope without creating fall line trails and erosion, even if it's hardscape. And so we
do have a plan to redo this existing trail that is eroding into the hillside to have accessibility to the back of the pool and to the wooded area, which we'll get to the next slide. And involve bleachers. We know a lot of people sit up here, like up on the hill here to look at this field. So that was the purpose of adding this number 2 bleacher here into the hill a little bit.
I was like, having coached, I'm like, oh, never saw anybody up there watching.
Well, we just saw like a
With your
little,
team.
Maybe it's the scouts with their,
yeah, there's just a little trail up here, almost like a user trail, and you can tell that people have hung out up here.
because they've hung out, along, yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
I've seen them hang out around the left field line, but not up in the.
So, I mean, how much spectator seating do we want to provide? What's reasonable here? If it's rec league play, I think we have this, with the additional bleachers, I think we have a sufficient amount. If you're hosting tournament play, then we can talk about doing a bleacher, on the hillside, on that in the middle of the soccer field area there. But again, that's a very steep slope, so we would have to evaluate whether or not, that could be physically constructed there. And, you're talking about capacity, 1,500, 2,000 people. You do something like that, then where do they park? I mean, does it?
Right.
I at least ask some more exploring, like essentially, I say number 9, by the larger baseball field, maybe expanding that in some way. I mean, my sense is, just the number of crowds I see for the high school baseball games. And part of, the buses coming in from other communities and so forth. Again, that's where I get the complaint about people blocking the sidewalk. Happens to be right now, Lebanon has a pitcher that maybe drafted in the first 3 rounds. The Major League Baseball draft, so it's a real big deal. I mean, I'm not saying we should build bleachers just for the scouts to put the radar guns on this guy. I see the amount of interest, and so it just feels like if we just add a bit more capacity.
Another challenge that we talked about with bleachers potentially on that hillside was just the overall distance of the soccer lacrosse field from that hillside.
Yeah,
If you put them on that hillside,
Yeah.
you could use them for baseball because you'd be
Right.
close,
Right.
but it'd be a really far distance to see
See for
the
the
soccer
soccer.
lacrosse.
Yeah.
Right, I guess I'm just trying to, how to, because, if you're seeing on I'll say the rectangular fields, that we're back to the sidewalk again, people walking on the sidewalk.
I would think if you added some statistics of how much seating we're going to get with the bleachers you've proposed versus an estimate of what we have now,
Right.
that might be helpful to the commission. I
Sure.
think it's hard to visualize little tiny squares making much of a
We're going
difference.
from 200 to 500.
Exactly.
That
I
kind of
also think
order.
it's important where it is, like, because when the field that Steve's talking about, when it gets busy, people put their chairs along the fence line where you have 13 and 14. So like that gets packed on the turf. People sit like pretty much on the foul line, and it's really not safe, but they sit there. A significant amount of people.
I see
Yeah.
13, 14 again, back to right there, though, you say you've got the question whether that fence can be raised. So to catch the balls, but I mean, still, people, they're there, they're either on
They
the
put their,
sidewalk.
they put their chairs inside the fence line, right up against the fence, where 13 and 14.
Right, but I'm saying they also are out on Cedar Boulevard.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Blocking the way there.
Canvas.
But for all they show up, I mean, as you were talking about starting campus, I don't know when that baseball season ends, but you want to get out there now, just so you can
check it out. Yeah,
Eyeballs on it,
sure,
go,
sure.
oh, that's what they see.
Right, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the backside, that would be the first baseline of the field. You could do, I mean, you could always, now, you're gonna have to look at that hill from a geotechnical perspective, but,
Yes.
you know, can you push that hillside back
Retaining wall in?
and put a wall back in there, to create more space back there? And then again, you know, what is the cost of that versus what is the benefit in doing that kind of analysis?
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot, again, there's a lot going on in a very confined space
Mhm.
that makes it very difficult without, you know, what level of investment
Mhm.
is the commission, you know, interested in making here? And again, I don't want that to be the driving factor of making decisions, but I also don't want it come back and say, you know, this is a $20 million project just to address the field area.
Well, I mean, it's the, you know, I suppose the good news is it's being utilized. You're saying the bad
Right.
news is it's being utilized.
Right.
But we want people to utilize the parks,
Right.
so we have to address all that.
Right.
Bottom line.
Sure.
Good.
Okay, well, we'll continue, I mean, we'll take that and we'll continue to synthesize that and see if there are ways, you know, we can do the seating comparison and talk about, you know, if we can address some of these other issues by doing weeks here and there to address them. Okay.
So there was just some other small things about this plan that I wanted to mention. One being, the addition of shade sails or
Yeah.
umbrellas in the
Yeah.
concession stand area, because that's a very hot place that people would be hanging out often. The updating the synthetic turf areas and possibly, having a new synthetic turf area in this field here, as a possibility. And the addition of bike racks, the new combination fences, which we talked about, and this parking, which has been discussed already. So I just wanted to.
That's a drainage under this field,
Very good.
is it? Was
This
updated?
was actually, we did the turf.
Oh, we did the turf, okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Because I remember the
Self-assessing filtration system.
Yeah, cool.
It's actually an upgrade of.
Yeah, I just remember it
the-
from many years ago being looked at.
Yeah, exactly. It's all like soft.
Yeah.
Before and after.
Uh-huh.
So one of the comments, so now we're looking at the forest area, and one of the comments was associated at our first commission meeting on this was the proposed parking at Park Ridge. That was just to take a look at it to see
Mhm.
if it could be accommodated, what could we accommodate? That is gone.
Thank
It's
you.
no longer on the table.
Evans.
It just, again, that was part of the discussion with
Sure.
staff and with Ian is,
Yeah.
let's look at all the different options and then go back and get feedback and then cut it back to what
Sure.
we feel is reasonable.
We did maintain a walkway through there because we know people do use that as an access to the park and a walkway to
Yeah.
get to the high school. So we wanted to make sure we still had that pedestrian connectivity.
No problem with pedestrian connections.
And I realize it's totally off the topic, but it's on but off. Rudy, if you're listening, that I got a complaint about that pathway, that it needs to be looked at, patch it with asphalt or something like that, so. I was gonna catch Rudy and I'm sure
He's always listening.
he's listening. So. Well, it's not yours.
Remind me how we landed on the disc golf course.
It's very low impact, low maintenance, low impact, and it's a way to maintain a lot of the existing healthy trees in that area and healthy undergrowth and shrubbery while still activating the space. And, I mean, really with disc golf, you install a small tee box and the little basket, and that's pretty much it. It's a very low cost installation, but they're very popular. So we bring a lot of people to the park. And even if people aren't using the disc golf, the creation of trails through this area just adds more walking space that's kind of designed for accessibility.
So I asked my husband about this because I'm like, okay, disc golf, tell me what you know. And he says that on all the bases, the army bases, hugely popular. This is like a big deal. Not for me, way too old for this kind of stuff, but he said
We're
this
gonna get
is,
you out.
yeah. On my bike maybe, but anyway, he says this is a big deal. So for whatever that's worth, it's anecdotal, but you know,
I mean, I think it's an underutilized part of the park, and as you said, it activates.
It's really-
I mean, it's a pretty place, but I rarely see people sitting there, and so it kind of goes
unnoticed.
And don't think of the holes here that are numbered.
Right.
Those aren't green fairways that are manicured lawns. Those are just,
So you
Pat,
can
so
see,
you can see where you're throwing your disc towards the basket in most cases.
Yeah.
And
clear.
speaking from the folks that quite literally is in their backyard, that they're concerned about, and one, my concern about, okay, is this, even though it's inexpensive, it still isn't worth the money. Two, going, okay, there's no parking, but if people are gonna use this, where are they gonna park to get to it?
Mhm.
So that is the, okay, we're activating it, you know, it'd be great if everybody walked to it, but not sure everybody's going to. So that's certainly the pushback that I'm hearing from the folks who live nearby, going,
Mhm.
so what's this gonna do?
I would assume it would be
Um,
this parking lot, and then they would take this path here, because this right here is hole number one, if you can see in the grade
Oh,
area
okay.
up there.
I-
All right.
You will be surprised at, this activity meets the needs of an age group that traditionally is underserved in the parks. This is for your
Hippies.
teenagers. Yeah, your teenagers, your young
No,
professionals, the college students, the young professionals, and then the hippies that get out there and play. But I mean, my son who's 22 went to a glow in the dark disc golf tournament last Friday night at a park, and they had 60 people registered. It was their first glow in the dark tournament on a 9-hole course. And they're having 5 more of those throughout the course of the summer
Nice.
at the park that they're going to. He goes out 3 times a week after work with his buddies. They go out and they play disc golf. And it's inexpensive. You're not paying greens fees and having to rent a cart and do all that kinds of thing.
David puts a green fee charge on that.
Well, so
I
there's
think,
no-
David, we need a beer concession. I mean, you know, really.
Really make
A couple things.
Sure.
One, I actually liked the old trail or the trail on the prior design that actually wound down.
Mhm.
It does.
I am concerned that the existing trail, I think that's the layout is essentially what it was before. Or what it is now, and that trail is a hot mess, to Commissioner Silverman's point. I'm completely fine with the passive use, right? I think this is okay, except that it is, it is very passive now in that it might get mowed once or twice a year, maybe. Again, having lived right there, I experienced this space. It's nothing going on there. It is gonna require more proactive maintenance.
But not dramatically more.
Well, from basically nothing, cutting down a few trees when they fall down and mowing twice a year to planting it, preparing it, maintaining it as an actively space that we want people to enjoy and not allowing invasives to go in, right? I mean, all the things that ultimately
Well,
are going to be important.
Mowing it 3 times because we're establishing meadows. Your flight lines for your discs are the areas, again, those only need to be mowed 3 times a year because that's gonna keep your woody plant material from growing and creating obstructions.
Right, so, so gonna be annual clearance, there's gonna be more.
There's more work.
There's more work, which is okay. Again, it's just, I think it's important that we think about, right, again, if we're gonna activate the space, we're gonna have to commit to maintaining the space and therefore having capacity to fund staff to do that work. The trails, I would like to see them more committed so that we're not building, deer trails, more established trails if we're gonna do it. I think that would be good for everybody, making them more accessible. But other than that, this is fine with me. I think there's costs there that we need to be cognizant of.
And that's not just this area, that goes across the board. The additional pickleball courts, I mean, we're
Right.
taking,
Right.
for every tennis court that we're replacing,
Mhm.
we're replacing with 3 pickleball courts. So you're tripling the number of people that
Mhm.
are playing in that space. It's gonna require more maintenance, higher level maintenance, all of those kinds of things.
And the question, and we don't know the answer to, is, as we've heard back and forth, people want pickleball, but they don't want to pay for it. Like North Metacross, is it, well, I've done that.
That's not
We've heard that.
true.
True.
I
I
think
agree.
that's what I've heard from the people, they want free pickleball. Versus saying, well, if I go over to the tennis center now, I have to pay for it, where over there it was free.
Mhm.
So there is that, one over there, not over here, or we could say, yeah, I don't want to pay for it, but it's available now. The tennis center where I just couldn't get on the court over there. And will that drive people? I've also had people go, I like tennis, don't take out the tennis courts to put in pickleball. So
Sure.
there's a lot of those questions, I think, and that will be some of the,
Right.
when you start talking to people, just remember that rackets in their hands, so be careful.
Well, that's
Um,
another reason why we're doing the phasing of the pickleball courts. We're only doing one court switching to the pickleball to see how popular
We
it
recommend
is.
you do it,
See what it-
and then you
it's-
can incrementally build it.
Yeah, so not all of those pickleball courts would be going in at once. It would only be
Right.
the one tennis court or the two courts in the one area to be replaced.
And I will tell you, I mean, Cranberry Township has 18 courts. You have to be a member of the Pickleball Association first, so there's a membership fee, and then you have to pay for court time on there. And there's a waiting list to get a membership to be able to play on their courts in Cranberry Township. So now they're going through, and because of the pushback from the people in the community that say that I can't get, I can't play if I'm not a member of that, they're gonna build, I think, 6 or 8 courts that are just gonna be open to the general public to come and play. But I mean, if you're hardcore and you want to have that court time, and you pay for it. And that's, now, some, here, you have a pickleball court in one of the parks now, correct?
Yes.
And you've not charged for that. So that has set a precedence. So the pushback now is, well, we'll just all go line up and we'll play there, and we're not gonna play down here. But once, that's not gonna last very long.
No, I have a
Either way, it gives
constituent,
us information about.
Right.
If all they want to do is play on free courts, that tells us something about the demand for pickleball.
One of my constituents is paying $5,000 in the winter season to use one gym out of a Castle Shannon school, one night a week from 7:30 to 9:30, $5,000. Yep,
for pickleball.
Yeah.
And they go in and tape it each
I have
time.
one more question here. So the only thing I know about disc golf is like the YouTube videos I see of trick shots. So
There is.
I'm sure for every like trick shot, there's like 100 that are bet, but so along, number one, and I recognize these aren't completely clear freeways, like you said, fairways. But along number one, maybe number 9 and up by number 4, I don't know if that is a fairway, but we've got the pool right there.
Right.
Is there netting, like,
No.
almost like we would have with the baseball field? Again, I don't know disc golf, like, is it crazy? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
No
on
one's gonna get
big
into it.
days, we've got 1,500 people there, right? 1,000 people.
That's
Yeah.
quite a hill.
I think you'd be all right.
Okay, we have half dozen more slides to go through. We have 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
So we're not, the
We
rec
have
center we
that.
discussed last time. Let's
Yeah.
skip over the rec center.
Yes.
This option here, this option, we just flipped the playground to the restroom side of the
Right.
parking lot. So we took away parking here and we put the playground near the restroom, because we thought that that was more convenient. Okay, that's it on the rec center. Play space, we have 2 options, 3
Three.
options.
3.
Let's go through them quick, Alex.
Yes, so we have 3 different layout options and 2 different theme ideas. The themes can be applied to any of these layouts. The
Right.
layouts are essentially how to divide the space to go up the hill.
Mhm.
This first one is to do small spaces and go up the hill slowly and wind a pathway through them.
Mhm.
So this is the lower spot, there would be some hill play, and then a higher spot, and this would be 2 to 5-year-olds. And then the path would wind around, and then there'd be 5 to 12-year-olds, which would be a lower spot, a hill play, and a higher spot. So that's the area where it's small spaces going up. This one is to combine everything in the middle, so to push the grade up and push the grade down. So there would be like a meadowy, like entrance area here that you would wind up to the center. And with all of the grade being pushed up, the idea is to have like a Mount Lebo volcano boulder dash type of thing for this one. So there would be a larger hill that they could go up, and again divided. The lower space 2 to 5, the Mount Lebo
We
space.
decided to Blue Slide Park, yes, to Mount Lebanon Blue.
Yeah.
Double blue.
5 to 12, and then a middle area for swings and things is what it's mentioned. And then this one pushes everything down closer, which is similar to the, third one we saw before.
The
where
rec
it's
center,
actually
the
right.
rec center scheme that takes away some of the parking and then puts
Yes.
everything down on the
Yeah.
lower level.
Yeah, so this is where this scheme comes in, and this one has everything closer to the bathroom, to the rec center, and then there's, the grade is still having to be added to the middle is in order to keep the retaining walls area here, and so this large area here would be 2 to 5, this area including the hill would be 5 to 12. And since all this space is now not playground, the idea is to make it an amphitheater. So, the area on the other side of the park near the basketball courts wouldn't be needed for the amphitheater space, which are used here. And the
Got it.
shelters be added. This one also has the idea of adding a small parking lot to squeeze it in over here, because it can be accommodated there with, I think, losing
For
only one or
accessible.
two
Yeah,
trees in order to make this
accessible,
more accessible. So this middle section here,
right?
accessible to the parking lot.
Yeah, I know you're blasting through this, just to follow on option 3. You're saying that play space 1 goes into the park, is taking away parking spaces on it?
No, yeah, but it adds them back here.
I think that's what you're talking about, so we
Yeah.
can take them away here from out of back
And
up
back
there.
there where they're more accessible to get into here. The problem is the slope, and it's not just if you're in a wheelchair, it's if you're older and you need a railing, there aren't any.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes it really, really difficult to get down and up this space.
Or just walking from here down to the pavilion, it's
Right.
like, there's no
Right.
railing. out there.
No, it's miserable.
So, but it's space neutral is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Um,
2 more slides.
yes, so these are the two different themes. The first one is mountain themed. So this is kind of an idea of
I
how
love
it
it.
could be. Some like still
Oh,
stacking
that's
boulders, some
lovely. Look at
large
that.
slides. You can see in this bottom left how we can accommodate the change in topography.
This is great, put some wax paper down and.
Another idea is to have like misters possibly if we're doing the Mount Lebanon
Yeah.
theme, and that could be like the volcano, so the kids could push a button and it starts to mist or smoke,
Oh, fun.
and that could be the mountain theme. The other theme to have is a forest theme,
Mhm.
since the park is very wooded and that's a very popular element to kind of keep that theme going and have like animals and trees and have everything nestled into some tree spaces. And that's kind of how this theme would feel with the pictures. So those are the playground options.
So our plan is to take this out, set up a tent in front of the pool
Great.
on Saturday of Memorial Day weekend to get input from the public on what we've presented tonight. If there's anything that you've seen here that is a no-go, let us know, because we want to drop that out,
Mhm.
and not present that to the public.
So one quick question, I think in the first slide you'd mentioned that the sand volleyball was coming out.
Yes,
What was the, is that just lack of use?
yes.
No use.
And the maintenance is too high. for
Oh,
lack
okay.
of use.
I'd be curious because the residents who live above, Utah Forest, they're watching. They said they're gonna watch the discussion session. I'm curious.
Fine.
What feedback they get as far as.
I hope they watch it.
So,
Yeah.
so I don't have an answer for you yet on what their take is on things.
And we'll have more precedent images. We cut like 6 or
Sure.
8 slides from
Yeah.
this, from our meeting that we had with Ian and staff a week ago. So those precedent images, like when you start to see pictures of what a disc golf course is,
Yeah,
you
it's,
start to relax.
yeah, it's
And,
not a.
oh, it's not, as crazy as I
Right.
thought it was going to be.
Right.
Those kinds of things. So hopefully there'll be favorable feedback.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it a lot. Sorry you had to rush through it.
Okay.
Lots of questions. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Oh, adjourned.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have, I don't think we have time. No, it's like 8:03 here. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
I'll talk to you.
12 hours ago.
Right.
Excuse me, pardon me.